Hey, happy Wednesday. Welcome to episode 132 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman, and today I'm talking with a phenomenal educator who's I'm just so excited because I know she's going to expand my mind and the way I think about things, and I hope she does the same for you. The education of young people is just so essential to everything we want to accomplish and that we hope for the future. And I'm really anxious to talk to my guests about it. But first, this.
Today's guest, Meghan Raftery.
Hey, welcome back. Awkwardly podcast still. Awkwardly awesome podcast. You're still watching Awkwardly Awesome Podcasts. And I'm still your host, Jason Freeman. And that was immensely awkward. Let me tell you a little bit about Meghan. Throughout history, humanity has relied on innovators to envision new ways of living and learning. Meghan Raftery is undoubtedly one of those innovators. Her passion for reimagining what it means to be a professional and creating new models for leading and learning is nothing shy of awe-inspiring. I am simply amazed by her breadth of vision and insistence that significant change for the better is possible. A generalist at heart, Meghan is a freelance educator in Virginia Beach, Virginia, with a passion for supporting educator wellness and developing curriculum. Her work supports a variety of school districts and organizations. She received her teaching degree from Shippensburg University, her master's degree from Penn State University, and endorsements from the University of Virginia, gifted education in George Washington University administration. She is also proud to be a certified life coach. Please help me welcome Meghan Raftery. Hey, Meghan, welcome.
Hey, Jason, glad to be here.
Will you please say your last name for the audience?
Oh, well, my last name is Raftery, so it's Raft and then Uri, and everyone wants to say Rafferty. But I'll tell you, Jason, I always tell everybody my maiden name was Horbal, Horbal, and I was an elementary school teacher. So however you want to say Raftery, I'm happy with it because I have a way better last name than I used to.
Well, that'd be a challenging last name in grade school.
Yeah, my students used to go home and say, my teacher, Miss Horrible, and their parents would say, that's so mean. They thought they were making fun of me. They didn't realize it was actually my name.
So Meghan, should we get right into?
Sure.
So what does it mean to be a general? What does it mean to you to be a journalist at heart?
I think that in a field like education, where the roles are relatively fixed, you have teacher and principal and reading specialist and counselor, there's a tendency to fit yourself into an existing box and then become really specialized in that area. And my entire life and educator experience has been very box resistant. And so as a generalist, I've always sort of tried to know a little bit about all the pieces and never stay in one box for very long. So to me, being a generalist is being a good listener and really leaning on people who have expertise and then helping them see outside of their sphere of expertise how they are within a larger ecosystem. And I don't know that we do enough of that in industries, but particularly in education, or tell young people that that's a way to be. So sometimes I like to think of even just my unconventional path being part of my teaching, just existing in some other way is a way to show people that you don't have to be the way that you might have seen in the Charlie Brown cartoon or on the sitcom or in your own schooling experience.
How do you think you developed this box resistance? Were you just born with this immense curiosity, or is it something that was cultivated?
I think early on in my childhood, I was a pretty compliant kid. Like the system really worked well for me, and I could achieve easily without trying too hard. I was pretty shy, and I listened to the rules and all those other things. But when I started to see times where that wasn't true, I think I did have a pretty keen sense early on that it wasn't my fault, that there was something about the system and not me personally. So, for example, when I was a really precocious reader and I'd go to the library and you can see my books behind me, I was a big reader early on. I don't remember learning to read, I just always could read. But quantitative, spatial, math things always came very difficult to me. And in my school, there was the high group and the low group, and it wasn't necessarily differentiated by subject area. You just were one or the other, and I was neither. So I was in the middle group. And that meant that my reading wasn't matching and neither was my math. I struggled in one area, and it wasn't an extreme situation, but it was enough for me to have like a sense of stepping back and going, wait, there can't be, I can be the first kid who's a good reader and not that great at math. There should be a solution for this. And so I was very meta about my schooling. I knew I wanted to be a teacher early on, and I always was looking for what could be better here. And so I would say that is an area where I always kind of wondered about the box in the first place. And I do remember as early as second and third grade being pretty critical of the school system even then, and saying this is who I'll be when I'm a teacher versus the way that it was.
When you were in second or third grade, how did you envision your teaching career developing?
My kids hate when I talk about this because they can't imagine it, but I had a really mean teacher when I was in third grade. I had moved to a new school district just in my own town, and she was a pretty established teacher. It was her last year before she retired, and she was one of those teachers who had like the grandkids of the kids in her class as students and things like that. And I felt very isolated in her class. I felt like she didn't see me and I wasn't connected to her. And so that shaped a lot of how I viewed schooling. A lot of my stories are not based on that great teacher I had, but that sort of disruptive moment where I was like, I don't think this should be how an adult treats a child. And kind of shaping that around the way I was going to be next. So in my heart, I was always going to be a teacher who recognized that a child is a person. Like that was really important to me, even as a young kid. I was drawn to adults who talked to me like I was whole and not just this cartoon character of a little kid. And I attribute some of that to my parents and some of the deep conversations that we had when I was young, but then also just other adults in my life who were genuinely curious about me. And then the adults who genuinely weren't, and how like kind of repelling that felt to me as a young person. And you know, I'm middle-aged now. I try to like kind of hold that in my mind and in my heart when I talk to a child, that they are a whole being. And I've always wanted to be somebody who treats them that way. And it's not to give them responsibility beyond their maturity, but rather just to see them in a more holistic way versus somebody to be seen and not heard, you know, as the tradition would say.
How would you say your parents nurtured your love for deep conversations? And
They were readers. That really mattered. They read things different from one another. So there we were talking about books a lot in my house. I
Mm,
remember a lot of political conversation. The news
mm,
was on a lot. Um, and also my parents didn't always, I don't think they did this on purpose. So I'll give them credit for it, but I'm not sure that it was intentional. They didn't like excuse the kids from the room to have the adult conversation. So we were around them and their friends being adults and things like that, where I could
mm.
see what the adult world looked like. I wasn't excused from it, I was present. And so that observation at least showed me what the way humans communicate in a way that's different than sort of separating the kids from the grown-ups, I think.
That of course, that observation of just this beautiful experience growing up of you growing up with your parents makes me think of social media, people being on their phones now, and how disjointed even conversation can be now.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would say something that people find unusual about my family and my children now is we talk a lot. Like, we have a lot of conversation in the car. Like, even my husband will say, "When you're driving, the kids ask 1,000 questions. When I'm driving, we listen to the music." Like, but there's just this constant dialogue, I think, in my family. We're talkers, we think out loud, we're outward processors. So that I can see that kind of rising in my own kids. The way they articulate themselves is very mature and beyond their years in a lot of ways.
That's that must be fun for both you as a parent and your kids.
Yes, and exhausting also because they
And
ask some hard
exhausting.
questions.
Have you thought about how you'll handle it as your kids get a little older and want to be like glued at the hip to their phones?
Yeah, my older son is 10, so he's already sort of entered that universe. And so what we try to do now while he's young is at least have conversation about it. Like, I'll say to him, because my older son he has ADHD as well, so he gets very hyper focused on whatever it is that he's doing. And we had this conversation even just the other day where he kind of snapped at me when I asked him to do something because he was on his phone and he didn't want to stop. And we paused, put it down face down, and I just said to him, "I want you to think about how I felt on the other side of that conversation." And he looked at me and he started welling up and he was very upset because he suddenly realized that the way he acted towards me isn't how he would have if he was really thinking about it. And so we do have those like kind of meta moments. Now, of course, that paints me as like this very gentle and patient mom. Sometimes it's just, "Hey, don't talk to me like that," But when we get the opportunity, we try to kind of talk about it to have that sort of empathetic, you really missed everything in the car window when we were on that trip because you were looking at your screen, and now you just went through a whole state and you'll never be able to say you saw it. How does that feel? Like those kinds of things, just pointing them out sometimes. I think noticing and then saying it is really important.
What a question to teach empathy. I want you to think of how I felt in that moment, and your son obviously gets in tune fast when
Mhm.
prompted because tears came to his eye.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think all of us sometimes we just need that reminder when our behaviors aren't in alignment with what we actually value to be kind of had our attention called to that. And as a young person, those moments of discomfort and shame can actually remind you who you want to be and how to be.
Um, oh, Jennifer Joe. Hey, Jen. Thanks for the the comments, sister. I greatly appreciate it. Um, so this is such a broad question. I know, but Megan, why is innovation important in education? Or do you believe that that it should just be the same old for hundreds of more years?
Yeah, I love that you asked that last part, because I have like my latest kind of, one of the things I'm really focused on is this 100-year mindset. If you've ever heard of that, like the idea of planning for 100 years in the future. I really
I told you would expand my mind. 100-year mindset. I
yeah.
love.
So, like, you think about, I'm really interested in sustainability from an environmental perspective, but extending the metaphor of sustainability into other fields like education. The definition that I like to use is the one where, and this is from somewhere, I'm not sure exactly, or maybe it's just one of those understood definitions, but sustainability is meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the needs of future generations. So
Sustainability is meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the needs of future generations.
correct.
Wow.
So if you take that lens and you use that to look at just about anything in society, to what extent are we meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the needs of future generations? And so that lens, to me, is it requires innovation. You have to think, what are we doing now, and how is that going to affect 5, 10, 100 years down the line? And if you think about education 100 years ago compared to now, we are very similar, using a model that was built for a different time with different problems and different challenges, and it's created problems for future generations more often than it's created solutions for those future generations. And in education, we're in the business of preparing future generations. That's what we do. And so, to me, innovation is a non-negotiable. I don't think we do enough of it, and I also don't think we embrace it as a permanent part of our mission, as opposed to a short-term fix for a problem, without using that sustainability mindset. How might this affect a future generation if we kept going with this? And I think even just asking the question has a lot of value. So if you're planning a cell phone policy for a school and you ask yourself, how will this policy affect these children 15 years from now? You make a different decision than if you're just wondering what's going to happen in third period.
So how would you in very general terms, how would you describe the model of education now, and how would you describe how you envision it changing to become more in line with a 100-year mindset?
I think that there's a contradiction in education that says there's a norm that most people are, and that's how we'll design. While at the same time, our culture is highly individualistic, that we like to be special and unique and recognize how we're different from everybody else. And
So
yet our
those two
model
things
is the
kind of
opposite.
tug of war.
Push pull constantly between those two things. So we accept a system that pretends that everybody's the same, and then every single person individually within their family and within themselves realizes that that's not true. So we have a fundamental difference between our delivery model and the widgets we're putting into that model that has always been there. But we haven't shouted that loudly enough, I don't think, and then made decisions based on that dichotomy. So to me, that's the challenge, is that we design around average, and literally no one is average. It's a mean, and that's not helping. And that means that our delivery system from top to bottom is not matching with what we value as a culture and as a community, both on a micro and a macro scale. But because education is so entwined with things like childcare and healthcare and job schedules and all these other things, we can't imagine the audacity that it takes to say, I have an idea that could change that system, because no individual sees themselves as a decision maker that can make societal level change, because we're too tangled up with all of these different pieces. So that, to me, is the fundamental issue in which no person feels the power to make that change. And then that means you have a school system made up of many stakeholders who feel powerless. And that is a crisis.
Jen Joe said, I love this conversation. Having decided to homeschool my kiddo, innovation is key to her learning and success. What
Yeah.
what 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 do you love about the homeschool route, Megan?
I would imagine, just to make an assumption, that Jennifer knows her child and cares about her child more than probably anybody on earth. And so she can be responsive to her child's needs and design around her child's needs, and she can ask good questions and she can pivot at the last minute. And she's not crowd controlling around her child and saying, how can I meet this child's needs without compromising the needs of the other people in this room? And how can I build a schedule around my child in our life? And it's probably also true that life and school are not two separate entities in Jennifer's household for her kiddo. Like, those are probably combined. And so in terms of preparation for life, learning is very connected to that preparation versus a place I go to do a thing until I can get back to my life, which I think is probably the reality for most kids.
Jennifer has would you agree or disagree that education planning has become lazy by expecting children designed uniquely to learn identically?
Yeah, I would say that maybe the word I'd use rather than lazy, which is as derogatory, is ignorant. I think it's a hope, it's a survival mechanism for us to pretend that children learn identically and to design that way when every single person knows that the emperor has no clothes on. We know that that's not true, and yet we operate as if it is, which means the burden for the lack of support that a child and a parent feels in a school falls to the child and parent instead of to the system. The responsibility to conform or to resist conformity falls on the individual family versus the system making changes to actually acknowledge that children are designed uniquely, which we all know is true. We just pretend is not true oftentimes in our design. So yes, lazy, ignorant, maybe survival is a word that I would use there. It's a hope. It's a we don't know what else to do kind of a feeling that is pervasive.
A conversation like this can quickly become overwhelming and feel a sense of powerlessness about all the things that need to be changed and feel ineffectual and stuff. But change does obviously happen. We're talking now about a school system that at one point in history did not exist at all. So we've come a long ways. How does that next level of change start to happen, do you think, where instead of feeling powerless, people feel like that they can be part of something positive that's moving in a direction they want?
Yeah, that's a question I think about all the time. And for me, the secret ingredient to that opposite feeling of powerlessness is hopefulness. And
Mm.
there's a science to hope, there's a theoretical framework to hope. And what we know about hope theory, and I use this a lot in my coaching practice with both parents and educators, there's kind of three ingredients to hope. And one of them is a clear goal. I know what I want and need. So let's use the example of my child has unique needs that are not best served by the conventional way of schooling. The sense that I know that that's my goal is to help my child feel that their uniqueness is important and valued versus something to be fixed. Second, in hope theory, is a sense that there are multiple pathways to achieve that goal. It's not just one way, and if this doesn't work, then all hope is lost. I can find 15 different ways to approach that goal. And if one doesn't work, I can quickly navigate to another one. And then third is kind of an outcome of those first two, which is a sense of agency. I believe that I can actually choose a path and make a difference and reach that goal. So with a sense of hope, a parent can navigate a school system alongside their child differently. A student can experience education differently. A teacher can make different choices in their classroom. A policymaker can aspire for different things. A principal can transform culture in their school. And hope is individual, but it's also collective and it's contagious. And in my work, I try to find ways to inject hope and then provide a sense of agency, or at least propel a sense of agency, because when people feel that, they see the innovation and they make the changes that then lead to a broader sense of hopefulness.
When you said about number two, knowing that there's 15 ways or 100 or 500 ways to do something, that sounds huge to me, because so often in debates about anything, we get stuck dancing between one or two options, and that leads to frustration and hopelessness.
Yes. And one of the things I think that systems are resistant to is abandoning a pathway that seemed promising, but has proved with evidence that it is not. So if you have multiple pathways, you can hop from one to another because you can change the navigation towards the goal if you have that sense of hope. There's other ways to get to that goal. So when the pathway becomes the goal, that's when we get into trouble. When we start to say we're on this path and nothing will get us off of it. I think that's where we start to like double down on a promise that doesn't work. That's when we start saying things like smaller class sizes are the solution. Well, not necessarily when there's a teacher shortage. Are there ways that we could use fewer people to have better quality experiences where kids feel connected to more people in their school? That's a pathway I'm interested in looking at. It doesn't mean it's the right one, but if we are only looking for small class sizes, then teacher shortage can feel very hopeless because our current delivery system does not allow for quality education as the teacher has more students coming into their classroom. So that's where I think the sense of multiple pathways can be really empowering for people to say we can abandon a path as well as choose another one, as well as restructure our goal or do whatever we're going to do next.
On the student end, how do you think you get students to think in terms of multiple pathways? And I know, especially in seventh grade, I was very black and white about everything, and it caused me a lot of suffering.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is to be able to show kids that this is a way and not the only way, that there are other ways. And part of our challenge right now in the K-12 public education experience in the United States is that you can pluck me down in Missouri or Oregon or Georgia or Florida or anywhere, and my experience is going to be pretty similar. And it's going to look pretty similar to how my parents' experience looked and how my neighbors' experience looked. And so we don't have necessarily the imagination to think about other ways. And so I think teachers and families and even kids asking, how else could this be? If this is the goal, how might this look different? We would probably get some really interesting and good ideas. The challenge is that you have to wait long enough. You have to give that wait time, and you have to allow the student to feel content that the barriers are removed and that they're, kind of uncomfortable with that question for a while, stick with it long enough that they even can imagine those possibilities. And one of the quickest routes to that is imagining other industries or other facets of society and how we can learn from those within a school system. So a student in a classroom can say, Where do I find satisfaction in my life? Well, when I go on TikTok, I can customize my experience and find exactly the video I'm looking for and get a quick hit of dopamine that makes me want to stay there. And suddenly I've learned something, or maybe I got into some trouble, or whatever else happened. But my experience was generally satisfying and I chose it. And here's what the conditions were like. Well, how do you TikTok your history class? And that's a trite example, but that sort of like kind of comparing two things that have nothing to do with another can break a student out of that black and white thinking and really start to spark some innovation and imagination.
And instead of feeling like school is good and TikTok is something I do when I want to waste time and feel guilty about, thinking about how they can inform each other, that's a whole different way of not only thinking but feeling about life.
Yes. And it has to be followed by adults who are willing to listen and perhaps do something about the student's idea. Because if they come up with this wild imaginary exercise and then it falls flat and they feel like they don't have that agency and that voice, you're actually thwarting your mission instead of encouraging it, because you might actually encourage a feeling of powerlessness versus really putting all of your weight and energy and support behind the student, who is ultimately the customer in the school, who knows what their experience is like more than I could. I don't know what it's like to be a seventh grader. I was one, but the context is so different from my seventh grade experience. It would be irresponsible and arrogant for me to think that I know what it's like to be a seventh grader. I don't. And the only way to know is to ask many seventh graders and then come up with a composite sketch of what it's like to be a seventh grader.
So this work takes quite a bit of humility, and
It does, and a willingness to accept some chaos, not know what the expected answer would be, to let problems be unsolved for a while. Those are all things that we are not prepared to do very often in schools. And a lot of times the teachers in schools are the students who played school very well. And so this is a difficult thing for them to think about, rocking that system that worked so well for them.
Jennifer says, I would love to see teachers have the freedom to use their intuition and creativity to meet children's needs versus strict have-tos.
Yes. Jennifer, we need to have coffee sometimes. I don't know where you're located, but I adore your question and your perspective here. But one of the things that's super important to me, I've started actually with this sustainability mindset in mind, referring to teachers and parents as sort of the first responders to the future generation. So if you think about that first responder mindset, the person who's right in front of the kids, modeling what life would look like. If we were really to professionalize and invest as a society in those first responders and say, if we want kids to have a good life, let's make sure that their models have a good life also, that they're showing, not telling kids what a good life looks like, that they are balanced, that they have a healthy lifestyle, that they have time to even come up with creative ideas, that they're relaxed, that they have high quality mental health, all those things that we're working towards. We say that. And then a lot of times our parents and our teachers have the least amount of freedom and the least ability to use their intuition and the least license to use creativity, or they're so stressed that those things are not even accessible to them. And then we say that's not what we want for children. Well, if your direct models are showing you that that's what life is like, how would you expect anything but that replication in the next generation? So one of the things that's really important to me as a freelancer is finding those opportunities to be on projects where teachers are treated with that level of freedom, where they're empowered to do that kind of work. And then where somebody's alongside them to say, that is a good idea. This one could use some work and some constructive criticism or a broader view, because maybe you need to look outside of your own experience and see how that is replicable in other places. We don't get to do that very much. And that's not the general work of an educator, but it is mine. I'm lucky enough to find that as my main source of inspiration in the work that I do most often.
In a chat before before the show you were telling me that pre-service teachers actually have more power than they realize to select the circumstance they want to teach in.
Yes. Yes. Really, and all educators do more than they realize, because there's such a demand right now for educators in so very many ways that we're still operating as if we're lucky to have the job, when the truth is society is lucky to have caring people in the role. And with that in mind, that's one of the most important things that I try to help my clients as coaching, as a life coach, to harness, is to say, what's most important to you and what's the true cost of going out after that? What are your biggest fears and how realistic are those fears compared to the actual reality? So if your principal, and if you're a typical classroom teacher, values you as a leader in that school, and you say, here's something I think I need and kids need and my colleagues need, if that principal is mad at you, or you get in trouble, or you get whatever it is that teachers are fearing might happen, you don't want to work for that leader anyway. And you can go find other places to work in many different ways. In almost any community, there is a shortage of people that care deeply. And if you have to go to the next interview and say, I had to leave my job because I cared very deeply about this and I wasn't able to do it in this place, most people who want that kind of teacher in their school will welcome that kind of story versus be repelled by it.
It's inspiring. We're changing subjects a little bit. What are your thoughts on reaching students who are on the margins, either from a family situation that's really painful, or maybe they have a physical, intellectual, emotional disability, and they just feel, you were talking about the concept of normal in education before, and they just feel so far from that normal.
Yes. The solution is so simple, it's almost silly to say, but what any kid, especially a child on the margins, needs is to be seen, and they need to be a co-creator of their experience. They need to be heard. And we try to design around them so often. We try to generalize what they need. We try to create policy around them, when really what it takes is a good question. What would be the best solution here? Give me 3 options that I can choose from. Like, to be able to have a voice, even as a kindergartner, a first grader, a 12th grader, an 8th grader, whatever else it is, the students oftentimes know what the better option would look like, and we just don't ask the question. And then if we do ask it, we don't always design around that. So I think students in the margins need adults who are not disenfranchising them, who are really asking them, what do you want and need here? And then to feel empowered enough to keep demanding what they need from the world for them to grow well and become part of our society. They're not waiting to conform to what success looks like, but they can define it. And if we're able to actually communicate that to young people, and an individual teacher can do this, a single mom, a neighbor, a pediatrician, a garbage collector, any person can see a kid and make them have that feeling in one small way, enough for them to want more of it and to demand more of it.
So I want to do a specific example here.
Yeah.
So say I'm a 5th grader who struggles with reading a lot. I'm dyslexic, and I'm always just disruptive and uncomfortable in class. What's an example of a question you may ask me to empower me?
The question that I always lead with when I don't know a child very well, because it's a great open-ended one, is, if you had all the time in the world and nobody telling you not to, what would you do with your time? And when you know that answer, or a kid even thinks hard enough about it, a lot of times they can find a reason to be the master of that thing. So, you could think about, like, say, a child who's dyslexic might be a really avid reader of graphic novels, for example, because they can read pictures in ways they can't read words. So they might be really, really, really tuned into plot points that are visually communicated. And so if I can harness that interest and then also say, oh, wow, you know more about this than anybody else. How can we get your knowledge out into the world, because the world needs it? The child has a different lens with which to view themselves within their school and their future, because now they understand that seeming, the negative thing that they have about them is actually what defines them. That's their superpower that then led to another set of skills that nobody else has, because nobody else has their story. And the more that kids have that feeling and that agency, like we were talking about before, that hope to say, I can design my pathways with this knowledge in mind. So, I mentor a lot of high school students, and I'll say to them, you think school is boring? Well, what if you're studying in this classroom human behavior? Because you're going to be a marketer and you want to know what motivates people and doesn't. What are you learning in this classroom right now that will help inform that future pathway? That's how you unlock a student's mindset about their schooling experience in ways that they can't control, but they actually can if they have that way of thinking and that empowerment and permission to do that kind of thinking.
So then how, then with that, so I love reading graphic novels because I can follow along, and I'm extremely good at it, and see that in a different way, and it is my superpower. But how do you celebrate that and at the same time teach me how to read? Because reading is going to be important in my life.
So, and really what that comes down to is, why do I need to learn to read? It's to meet this goal that I have. So what's my goal now as a result of sort of this illumination about graphic novels? Maybe now, let's say I want to be a screenwriter because I really understand the hero's journey, for example. The next thing that I would do with a child like that is say, okay, so how does a screenwriter use the skills of your current course load in their work? So if they have to know this, that, and the other. So how can we find books that are related to that, or even just understand how this short story in class is going to unlock new knowledge for you as a screenwriter? I might persevere a little bit differently through that task because I have a different motivation at the end of it. So knowing that motivation can lead me to sometimes really doubling down and investing in something. And also, I think we have to give kids permission for this, to eliminate things that I actually don't need to know how to do, or things that I can just be good enough at to get by. So to be able to concentrate your efforts in things that matter, and to be able to streamline so that those things that matter are at the front, an individual student and their parent can make that choice. Can we accept a C in a class? Can we say, this homework assignment, we've tried really hard, but now what's more important is that we go to sleep tonight and have rest and do well on the test and maybe get a 0 on that assignment? Some of that negotiation and decision making, I think we need to be more respectful of the student's ability to navigate and make that choice, and to help them to really concentrate where it matters. So there's just too much to learn. So if we can narrow it down to the most important things and give them the voice to make those choices, their schooling will be entirely different.
As you say this, calculus comes to mind. I think I did okay in it, and found it interesting enough, but I have no idea why I learned it. I don't think I use it in any of my thinking pattern. Maybe I do, but I don't think I really had a sense of agency when I took that class about.
Mm-hmm. But you do have that sense now as an adult. If you needed to learn calculus in the next 6 months, you could make a plan in this world right now to learn calculus. So that's the other thing, is that the cost of the child not learning calculus is very limited in today's world, because you could go on Khan Academy and watch videos. You could find a friend who's a math teacher. You could get a tutor. You could read some books. You now have the skills to learn calculus. When you were a child, that was dependent on your situation. It's not true anymore. We can learn almost anything now that we're independent adults, but we almost like don't give that license to kids until way later than we should. And then they maybe don't even realize they have that power by the time they do have it.
So you're saying it's not essential to for a kid in high school's happiness and success to learn calculus right in high school.
Or unless the goal is, can they do hard things that they didn't believe they could do? And calculus is a great vessel for that, right? So there's sometimes a lesson that's beyond the learning of calculus. And that should be up to the child to decide. I think to a certain extent, they can start to pick and choose. What's the cost of not taking algebra in 7th grade? Well, if the cost is I get off the track of honors math, and then that's going to affect my college decision, might be worth persevering through algebra in 7th grade. But if that cost is not aligned with my expectations and my next steps, and there isn't a high value cost, and maybe the opportunity is that I can take a second language because that's really important and valuable to me, and I can maybe do a math that's a little bit simpler and be on a simpler track, that should be a pathway that's available to me.
Thank you for prompting. I would be so remiss if I didn't talk about this with you two. How do we encourage young people to embrace the challenges that are going to come their way in life, instead of shying away from them or saying, "Oh, I can't do this"? What are your thoughts on that?
I have an almost unrealistically optimistic view of the power of reframing with and for any human, not just kids, but being able to say things like, oh, that's good. And looking for the sort of almost like improvisational opportunities to see the value of something. This is something I do a lot as a parent with my children. Both of them are identified gifted, and I have mixed feelings about what that even means in a school system and all these other things. But there are things that they're exceptionally good at, and there are things that they are not. And because they're exceptionally good at some things, the things they're not exceptionally good at are harder for them than if they were just average at all things, because they expect to be great at everything, and they don't necessarily always have the skill set to approach something that's hard. So my job as a parent is to say things to them like, wow, isn't it so awesome that you have the opportunity to struggle through this thing and then see how far you've come. It's not about the outcome, but about the journey to get there. And so an adult who cares about you, that has that in mind, can make a huge difference. And that is really important, because if me as the parent, if I'm super focused on them getting an A on every single element of their report card versus saying, today, maybe we need to just lay off on this piece because you're feeling like this is more important. And then also saying, okay, sometimes we need to circle back and then work really hard on this thing you didn't think you could do, just to prove that you can. Like getting that kind of conversation and reframing in a kid's mind and that mental model. We need that more as adults. If we can cultivate that mindset in children, I think there'd be a lot more perseverance. One of the reasons why they're not always eager to do that kind of thing is because we are a very outcomes focused society. There's a clear good and a clear bad for how you go through schooling and how you go through life. If you're on the basketball team, points, that's the goal. But with my son, who's not so great at basketball but loves it, I can talk to him about defense. And wow, when you screened, that made this other player able to score. That's a really good skill, and everyone's going to want you on their team. Well, now he has a skill that's manageable. He's never going to be able to reach that basket. He's too short, but he can screen for anybody. And now he has a confidence builder. So, finding those little corners, I think can do a lot for kids, and shifting the outcome from, you hear a lot about growth mindset and fixed mindset. I think it's more nuanced than that. It's saying, what is the goal? And then how do we meet that goal versus this external thing that I'm not in control of?
This brings up grades, of course, and I was thinking recently about during my schooling, I would be focused on studying for the test and getting the grade, and after that focus on the next thing, and instead of being focused on fixing my mistakes and learning from my mistakes. That seems very counterproductive.
Yes. And I would be willing to bet Jennifer and other homeschooling parents probably have some really good examples of how they motivate the child to continue to persevere and succeed, because the grade is meaningless in the house. There has to be another outcome. You have to define success in some other way. So, one of my favorite strategies as a teacher with almost any grade of student is to say, what does success look like on this? And then how are you going to get there? And then asking them afterwards, did you meet your goal and what would you do differently next time? That type of feedback is so much more important than me as the evaluator externally saying, here's the grade. So even if it's just giving them the criteria and saying, look at your work and to what extent does it match up, that is a valuable exercise in and of itself, and a learning experience in and of itself that we don't often afford to kids. And we also don't realize that the added benefit for that as the teacher, the parent, the whoever else is the student is doing the work. When they grade themselves, I don't have to sit at home and grade papers. All I have to do is agree or disagree with their grade. So that's one of those like high leverage, low voltage strategies that can happen in any learning situation and make a really big difference.
But then we start rubbing up against the system and tradition and stuff. So like I could say that's all sounds good, Meghan, but what about standardized tests and scores I use for funding, on and on and on and on?
Yeah, and that's where the power list starts to creep back in, because you feel like it's bigger than you. And so there's a balance between conforming and pushing and deciding what's worth pushing and what's worth playing. And I think that conversation should happen with kids more often. I think about some of the underachieving gifted kids that I've worked with where I say to them, what's the value of fighting this versus just playing along? What will playing along get you that you actually want versus fighting this particular thing?
What's the value of fighting this versus just playing along?
Yep. And an example of that I'll give
kids choice. You're all about giving kids choice.
Yeah, and treating them with the respect to say they deserve that choice. That's where that agency comes from. And an example in my own family is my older son, who's 10, has a high level of anxiety. He's very perfectionist, and he worries a lot about being right or wrong, and he worries about people seeing his right or wrong. So standardized testing is an incredibly stressful thing for him. And he has a 504 plan, a legal document about how to navigate that anxiety in school. And in my state recently, when he went into third grade, there was a change over the summer where they added standardized testing in the fall as well as in the spring. So we had prepared.
That's awful.
It is. And we had prepared for getting him ready all the way through third grade for this end of third grade experience. But when it suddenly was in the third week of school with a brand new teacher and starting the year, my husband and I made the decision to just opt him out of that assessment. Now, that sounds easy. It's not. There's a lot of navigation that a parent has to do to find out how to do that. But every parent does have the right to opt their student out of standardized testing. So there's a cost associated with that. My son is going to get an unexcused absence that might be related to his future coursework or whatever else. But at that time, the cost was worth the fight. Now, as we approach the end of fourth grade, I can start to ask myself again, is the cost worth the fight? Well, in fourth grade, one of the things that he shared with me is the day of testing is not so stressful as the preparation. When he sits there knowing he's not going to take the test, he can do any practice test and any game and anything because he's not worried about the ultimate outcome being success on that assessment. So there's actually weeks of reduced stress before that assessment takes place not just the day of testing. And so in 4th grade, again, we've made the decision that that is worth the fight. Now, when he gets to 7th and 8th grade, and it's going to start to determine, does he go into advanced science or not? And he wants to be a scientist. He's going to have to say to himself, is this anxiety worth, can I manage my anxiety well enough to get the outcome that's more important to me? So now do I need to learn some coping strategies and to accept this? Or do we continue to fight? Is the fight worth the outcome? And that's something that we have to ask ourselves every single time as we go through. And so that's where I think that balance between playing the game and fighting the game is really important, where you ask yourself, where am I going to put my energy and time? And then what are the effects of that? What are the effects of not doing it? What are the effects of doing it?
And what an important life skill to teach a young person, because that's going to come up again and again and again and again throughout life.
Yes. And that's why he's part of that conversation, even though he's 8, 9, 10 years old. It's not the adults are making this decision for him. We have always committed to making that decision with him. And that, I think, is incredibly important, because he can't make all the decisions, but he should have a voice in the decision-making process.
So this whole is so good on helping young people be empowered, on reforming education, on ideas about parenting in a more empowering way. This all is so good. Thank you. I ask each of my guests this question. To me, I love the concept of doing imperfect best. And what it means to me is I envision the best I want for my life and want for my contribution to humanity, and then I go for it. But when mistakes happen, when circumstances change, instead of going, oh, see, I knew it wasn't working, and giving up, I use the information to refocus my efforts on doing better next time. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, Meghan?
I love that phrase. I wrote that down. I'm definitely going to find a way to use that. But for me, one of the professional lessons that I had to learn, one of my passions is curriculum development. I love instructional design. And for a good part of my career, probably the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I envisioned a perfect curriculum. I knew what it looked like and that it could work. And I had the opportunity to be a leader in curriculum design and discovered that my perfect plan only worked for me. And even then would never have been perfect. That it's this living, breathing, dynamic thing that is shaped by the people who interact with it. So my imperfect best requires me, and this is a constant, daily, minute by minute struggle, to frame what I'm doing in the context of, you're not making a permanent end thing. You're approaching a goal that you will never actually reach, that you're making it incrementally better one step at a time. And that if you're constantly focused on the fact that it's not best yet, you're going to miss all the progress that got you to best. And so my imperfect best involves stepping back and realizing what happened already that was worth celebrating, that I would have missed if I kept seeking, instead of stepping back and really appreciating what came before. And that is a literal constant struggle for me, but something that when I do take the time to do it, reminds me why I'm even here. Why do I exist in the world? What is my purpose for being? My purpose is to constantly be striving for better than we already have. But that can be an exhausting and defeating life if you can't celebrate the progress you made along the way.
My purpose is always to strive for better, but that can be exhausting and defeating if I don't celebrate along the way.
Yeah.
Profound, really well said. Thanks so much, Meghan. There's so much we didn't get to in an hour went really fast, and we could talk for 4 or 5, but it's an hour-long show, so thanks so much for being here. And
yes, and if I could just give one message to your listeners and watchers, is that those first responders, and you might be one of them if you're a parent or you have a child in your life, need us right now. They need everybody. They need all of us to say, the people right in front of the children are modeling what a good life is. And if we say one thing and do another, kids are really good detectors of nonsense. They know when we're saying something that's not what we're doing. They are very keenly aware of that. And it erodes their trust in adults and society over time. The more often those are two different realities, what we say and what we do. So there's a huge cost that is the cynicism of our future generations and their worldview, that every single day, every person can do something to help support our first responders. And that might be you. You might need to really help yourself. And it might be that there's a teacher in your life, or a doctor, or a principal, or a nurse, or a counselor, or somebody who just needs kudos or a hug or a coffee or just something to make them know that the world appreciates the value that they have. I think that has an extension to children that it would be a huge mistake for us not to invest in as a society.
And that you just gave so much hope, because not only if we take your advice, not only do first responders get nourished, but having the purpose of nourishing first responders gives us all a place, more meaningful purpose in a world where we really need meaningful purpose to be our best.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Of course. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you today and always.
Yeah, I look forward to our next conversation.
For sure.
Wow. Thank you, Jennifer Joe, for all your great comments. Appreciate it so much. And after this, I'm just thinking of the joy of talking to people with big ideas, and who are taking big actions. We only had an hour, so we couldn't get to everything Megan is doing in the world. She's doing a lot, and it's so empowering to hear from people like this, and also to appreciate this in ourselves, where we have great ideas and we're taking actions on them. So I encourage you, as always, to have more great conversations with the people around you. Find out why they're amazing. Find out what they're doing to help the world grow, and also have this conversation with yourself, and, as Megan says, really celebrate what you're doing to make progress, move forward, to create something new. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next week, Stephen Leapley's on. He has so much to say about living the way a person wants to live, and bringing out the best in people and creating a legacy. So tune in next week. Thanks for tuning in this week, whether you're watching it live or watching it 5 years from now. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, which will be next Wednesday. Until next time, where is it? Oh, it's a new outro. Check this out. Oh, okay. I didn't time that way. Oh, bye. Okay.